Happy Monday, everyone. Once again, it is time for Ask Mike. And before we get started, Mike, with some of these questions, you got something you want to say about last week?
Now, first of all, are we in mourning here? It's
we are.
All black?
We are. We are. What are we mourning? I don't know.
Maybe we're mourning the fact that I accused Clay Travis.
Oh, yeah,
of
we were really sad about
Remember
that.
last week we got into this Saturday Down South article, which basically stated that Arkansas and Vanderbilt might end up getting kicked out of the SEC if more teams continue to expand into the SEC, which is a totally stupid article and worthless. And I somehow associated that with Clay Travis, probably because Clay Travis in the past has had a history of popping off about Arkansas fans and saying insulting things. But actually that was from the Saturday Down South website, which is different from Travis's Outkick. Used to be Outkick coverage. I think they just call it Outkick now. So I apologize to Clay Travis, even though he does probably not even aware that I said that. But somebody pointed it out, and it is correct. It's a different website. So Clay Travis still is a jerk sometimes to Razorback fans. But in this
at least
case,
not this time.
He wasn't a jerk, and he wasn't part of an article that was about as silly as I've ever read.
Yeah. All right. So let's dive into these questions you got for this week. All right. Our first question this week comes from Whippersnapper, who asks, besides the '64 national championship team, which past offense and defense from any past seasons would you match up together on a team to win it all?
See, that's kind of complicated. You take one from one team and one from, and I don't have to do that.
This is why they don't draft defenses in fantasy football. It's too complicated.
Too complicated.
Okay.
But it doesn't have to be complicated, because all you got to do is take the '77 team, because that still has more talent on that team, probably on both sides of the ball, and not just the starters. That team had depth. It was really the result of some of Frank Broyles' last coaching. His last staff and some of the recruiting that they did that Lou Holtz then came in and benefited from. But that team, that '77 team, was good on both sides of the ball. And the only reason they didn't win a national championship is because Earl Campbell caught a screen. They had bottled him up virtually the entire game, but in the third, I think it may have been the third quarter, it might have been the fourth, they threw a screen pass to him, and he got out on the corner. That guy's hard to tackle anyway, and they made use of the fact that Arkansas didn't have some size out there. He got all the way down to the 2-yard line. They scored right after that, and then I don't know, I think it was 9-6 or something like that, and or maybe 13-9 was the score. Anyway, that was the difference between winning a national championship and not, because Arkansas, that was the only game Arkansas lost. I really believe if they'd won that game, they would have played in the Cotton Bowl and won that game, and they would have been national champions. So that team, to me, and I've talked to a lot of people that were around back then. I wasn't around for the '64 team, but I was definitely covered the '78 team, '77 team, '78 Orange Bowl. And most of the old-time players have told me that that was more talented than the '64 national championship team. There were great players, deep players. That's why they were able to take their three of their best offensive weapons. Lou Holtz suspended them, and it didn't slow them down a bit. They still beat Oklahoma like a rented mule.
All right, Parallax Pig wants to know, the OU Texas addition to the SEC fired back up the Super League talk once again. My assumption is that it will be a football-only league that breaks away from NCAA, and the rest of the sports will still fall under NCAA control. What is your opinion on this? That's interesting.
You know, it's possible that that's what they'll do. I still believe that in its heart, the people in the SEC office, probably some of the ADs, that what they'd really like to do is just get completely away from the NCAA. That is all sports, and start all over and start a new governing body and do it for every sport. But that would be complicated. So this might be an option. You just break, I mean, football is already different from the other sports anyway, because the NCAA doesn't control the football playoffs. That's why they had no say in whether or not that football was played last year, because they don't really govern football in that way. They've got rules and all of that and recruiting. So I think it would be easier to do it that way, to just break off and have you know, take football out of the NCAA's control. And that would be, you know, an upper division, what's now probably the Power 5. But the problem with that is I'm not sure that all the Power 5 would go along with that. So if they were to do this, I think it would be more likely at this point that it would be just football, but might not happen anyway, because there's some other things at work that are going on right now that might prevent that. So I'm not sure what's going to happen.
Yeah, I'm glad I looked at this next question, because I was going to ask you as a breakout question to that one about this one. So Mountstown, thank you so much for getting there, and I didn't want to steal your thunder. He wants to know what's the reason behind this supposed alliance between the Pac-12, Big Ten, and the ACC. Sounds like they are trying to gang up on the SEC. Are they that scared of the SEC expansion?
Well, I think that they're afraid of that. I think they think that some of the things the SEC wants might not be good for them, and what we just talked about. I think two of those three conferences, for instance, would be much more likely to want everything to stay within the NCAA's control. Now, look, the NCAA has already said we're going to decentralize. We realize we've had too much control, and I think they're being forced into this. It's almost like you have been really rotten to your girlfriend, and she puts her foot down, and you think she's going to now dump you, so you start making concessions.
Yeah. Oh, I'm so
I won't
sorry.
do this anymore.
Yeah.
I'm going to do this and that. That's almost what the NCAA is doing now, because they've already announced a kind of a convention that's coming up, and they're going to decentralize and all of that.
Yeah.
So I think what's at work here is those three conferences are worried that the SEC is so powerful that when all this stuff comes up for a vote, when they decide the future direction of certain things, that the SEC is just going to dominate everything. So if you get a voting block together and you say, well, no, I don't want this. We don't think that's good, so we vote against it. So you thwart the SEC. College football 12-team playoff is one of these issues. I think especially the Big Ten and the Pac-12, and especially the Pac. Where is the Pac-12 in the college football playoffs right now?
They had a chance with Mariota, and they blew it.
So
that was a long time ago, though.
They're almost like
2014.
This has turned into what? It's turned into SEC, ACC, with some Big Ten and maybe some Big 12. But the Pac-12 has gotten left out. Well, I think what they're worried now is if you go to this 12-team playoff, that the SEC will say, hey, let's don't have any automatic bids or anything. Let's just have a rating system like we do now, and the committee will just pick the best 12 teams. Because honestly, if you don't do that, you run the risk of making the playoff look silly, which a lot of people think that's too many teams. I don't think it's too many teams, but if you pick the top 12 teams, I think it'll work. Well, they don't want that, because they're afraid that if you pick the top 12 teams, 7 or 8 of them will be out of the SEC, especially when OU and Texas go in.
Yeah.
So they're kind of wanting to fight back against that. Maybe.
And then you've got these non-conference. You've got Notre Dame, who's an independent.
Right.
You know, then you've got UCF, who honestly has been playing well, and they've held their own against some Power 5 schools. But do you give a team like UCF or last year Coastal Carolina a shot in the playoffs, and then they are getting over a big Power 5 school like a Washington or something? So, you know, there's a lot there.
Here's the other part of this that I think might happen. The SEC might say, you know what, we're going to form an alliance of our own. We're going to go and form an alliance with the Big 12 because they're not included in this. Now, you might say, well, those are a bunch of terrible schools. Well, they're not terrible.
They're going to steal 2 schools from them and then go align with them?
I don't know they're going to steal schools, but...
No, well, they stole OU and Texas.
Yes,
already.
but maybe an alliance right now, and even with those schools, after those 2 schools come into the SEC, you got an alliance with them. And then what if they form an alliance with some of these better mid-major conferences that have pretty good teams in them? And the point is, it's about a voting block. If you're trying to get more votes than us, how about we figure out a way to get more votes than you?
You know what this sounds like?
So this could get really weird before it's over.
I feel like we're now turning into lobbyists in D.C., where we're lobbying for some votes, and we're walking around Congress. Can I go? Do I have your vote? Do I have your vote? I got to cross the line to get some votes over here.
Absolutely.
That's what,
it's all about the future of mostly college football. But there are so many other things involved in this. For instance, the Pac-12 is all upset, at least that's what we're hearing, because they say the SEC is a football-only conference. Well, now, wait a minute. Let's name the other sports in the SEC that dominate. Women's basketball. It's the best basketball conference in the country. Okay, how about gymnastics? Everybody knows the best gymnastics teams are out of the SEC. Softball is
all
close.
13 SEC softball teams went to the NCAA
so
tournament.
it's probably the best in softball. Track and field, men and women's, it's the best league. Golf. They dominate golf. You get just almost
baseball.
Almost any
it's
you want
still
to name.
competitive. Basketball is still competitive, even against an SEC an ACC where everyone knows the ACC is a basketball conference.
But the SEC has gotten better in basketball lately.
Yeah.
So to say that it's football only is idiotic. But now here's what the Pac-12 comes back with. Yeah, but you have all these sports you don't care about. And so what are we talking about here? Well, let's take Alabama. I looked them up, and they're pretty typical of the SEC. They've got 10 sports, 10 scholarship sports, okay? USC, Southern Cal, they got 21. 21.
My cousin, my husband's cousin was on the sailing team at USC.
Yes, they've got all this stuff.
Rowing, sailing.
And so what they're saying is,
that.
if the SEC starts dominating, we'll end up with a lot of these other sports will just go by the wayside. Well, if you want to fund 21 sports, that's your business. But here's what happens at schools like Arkansas and the SEC. They look and they say, well, wait a minute. We've got all these non-revenue sports. Once you get past football and basketball and maybe baseball, the rest of them don't generate enough revenue to cover their costs. So it makes you a non-revenue sport. It actually, the correct title would be, I don't know what the title is. You do produce some revenue, but not enough to cover.
Sure.
So what the SEC likes is they like sports where at least people show up. Gymnastics, for instance, huge at Alabama.
LSU.
Georgia.
They sell out here at Arkansas. They're better crowds than women's basketball games. Now we're getting better, but yeah.
Even softball, bigger and bigger crowds make some money off that. So you still got some sports like golf that, I mean, you don't have to pay to go to a golf tournament. So whatever their expenses are, that's just what it is. But golf doesn't cost that much anyway. You don't have that many guys involved, or men and women involved. And then baseball, they've got it right now limited to 11.7 scholarships. And a lot of these schools are making a lot of money off baseball now. So what the SEC does is they go, well, at least let's try to have sports that have people interested in the sport. In other words, let's don't just create a sport like sailing. I've said this before. What if there's a sport I like? What if I got a son? Let's say I'm not as old as I am right now, and I've got a son coming up, and he's a Frisbee golfer. Boy, he's really good at Frisbee golf. Well, why can't we have Frisbee golf at the U of A? And they go, well, okay, we'll create it. And then nobody shows up. But that's what you have with a lot of these sports in these schools that have 21, 22 sports, is you got a bunch of sports that are just for people, and you ask yourself, what is the point of it? I mean, you could create a sport on anything. We could have,
badminton.
Yeah, or we could have, what's that thing?
Table tennis. Pong.
I used to play that. Marbles and the other one. What's the one?
Jacks?
Jacks. Yes, a Jacks team and all that.
I used to play that.
I don't
know.
We could just think of anything you do and say, let's just create a sport and give scholarships. But then who's going to pay for that? Let's see, the student activity fee. If you lined up on enrollment day, when you're signing your check for what your total fee is going to be, your cost of tuition, your room and board and all that, and you're writing a check, and they say, oh, by the way, here's a $1,000 student activity fee because we want to have a Jacks team and 4 or 5 other things, you're going to go, I don't think I want to do that. I want to give a full ride so we can have a marbles team. So, or how about tax dollars? You go to the taxpayers of Arkansas and say, we only have 10 sports here. We need some more. Let's take a look at all those people out there that
playing croquet.
Yeah, and badminton and sports like that. They deserve to have scholarships too, but you have to pay for it. No, that's not going to fly.
Hey, if you play marbles and jacks or badminton or croquet, we still love you. We're just trying to make a point.
We just don't think you should have scholarships that we have to pay for. Now, that's the whole point. All of this, that is wrapped up in this too. There's just so many aspects to this whole alliance thing.
That's a lot.
But I will say this, what makes no sense to me is the ACC aligning itself up with those two meatball conferences.
I don't get it.
Because I get the Big Ten and the Pac-12. They have similar views on things, but not the ACC. That's still more of a Southern type conference.
I'm going to tell you, as a girl who grew up on the East Coast, who went to an ACC school, I'm annoyed.
It's annoying.
I'm annoyed. It's annoying.
Why are you doing this?
Yeah. Grow some. That's what I say. Grow a pair.
Yep.
What are you doing?
Let's do that.
Jeez.
Let's fight back.
Okay. All right. Pat Boat asks, how good do you think Al Jefferson would have made the Hogs had he stayed committed?
Yeah, it's an interesting
you're gonna have to
question.
educate me on
Al
this.
Jefferson was, to my knowledge, and somebody may know different. If they do, I'll correct it next week. But to my knowledge, he's Arkansas's only none and done. In other words, Stan Heath got a commitment from him in the 2004 recruiting class, basketball. He was the #1 center in the country, the #4 player overall, and he averaged, get this, 42 points a game his senior
incredible.
year. He was a stud. And so Stan Heath had been struggling a little bit. He actually had some pretty good teams, but he just didn't match what Nolan did.
That's
that was
tough.
the whole thing back
Hard
then.
to follow
was
it.
you're not doing in the we want you to make noise. The same thing that affected Mike Anderson. We want you to win NCAA tournament games, and he wasn't doing that. So what difference would Jefferson have made? I think if he had gone ahead and come to Arkansas, I think it would have been here 2 years. I think they would have gone to the NCAA tournament the first year. Might not have won more than one game the second year, which was actually a pretty good team. I think he could have. They could have been an Elite Eight team that year.
Yeah.
So with him on the team for those 2 years, and then I think that affects recruiting for other players. I think the John Pelphrey years would have never happened. Stan Heath wouldn't have been fired. Now he probably wouldn't still be here now because Frank didn't want Heath in the first place. He wanted Bill Self. So he was always trying to figure out a way to fire him. But this would have sort of prevented that for a while. And then we wouldn't have to put up with John Pelphrey. And what's the significance of Pelphrey? In the years that I've covered Arkansas, which is 75 on, he is the only really bad basketball coach we've ever had at this school. You may not have liked Heath. You may not have thought Anderson did the kind of job you wanted or whatever. I mean, you had Nolan.
But Anderson won games. He
did
still
win
has
games.
never had a losing
Some
record.
people just look at Eddie Sutton and Nolan and they think that's the template. And now Musselman started his. It looks like he can be in that group. But the only one of those coaches that were really bad was Pelphrey, and he was like, unlike hardly anybody I've ever. He reminded me of John L. in that John L. just kind of walked around, and Heath would. I mean, Pelphrey would do things like he would. Somebody told me that he slept till noon, that he liked to sleep late. And then, because one time, the guy that told me this worked for a hot tub company, and I guess they bought a hot tub and wanted it installed. But his wife said, don't come before noon to install the hot tub. And so they came at noon, and he rang the doorbell, and he was still asleep, you know. And so I guess but then he would get up and go to press conferences at 2 o'clock. Well, he would wear these warm-ups that looked like somebody sat on them, you know, like throw them down and just sit on them for 2
so
days.
he slept in them, is what
Yeah,
you're
and
saying.
you put these warm-ups on, and then he'd show up at a press conference, and he had this really habit of like he never considered that question might be asked, because somebody would ask a question, he'd go, well, and he'd get about halfway through the first sentence, and he would just stop, and he'd just be looking. And can you imagine with what we do, where we need sound bites? You're like having to edit sound bites and cover them up because you have these long, giant pauses.
Jeez.
So, yeah, Pelphrey was kind of in over his head at this school. He did okay at South Alabama, but no,
Yeah.
I mean, Jefferson might have prevented that.
Okay. All right. Alex for Hogs 88 says, with the NIL and some athletes making an unreal amount, for example, Alabama's freshman QB making at least $800K, would putting some kind of limit on how much an athlete is able to receive from the NIL level to the playing field and recruiting game, would a 50K or 100K cap be reasonable?
No, you'd get sued on that. If the NCAA tried to step in and put a cap, because what was the original ruling from the Supreme Court? The Supreme Court basically said, look, you can't take athletes and tell them they don't have the same rights as you or me or anybody else. If somebody came along and offered you a whole bunch of money to go somewhere else and you wanted to take that, if you bought your own contract out, you could make as much money as they offered you.
Yeah.
So why then are you saying athletes can't earn money? So now that ruling is down. Well, can you imagine coming and say, yeah, well, you can make money, but you can only make this amount? It just wouldn't work.
No.
The answer to what he's talking about, which is he's basically saying, look at the advantage Alabama's going to have in recruiting. Word gets out that their starting quarterback can make $800,000, $1 million a year in NIL stuff. then if other schools can't match that, then they've got a natural advantage. Duh, that's probably what's going to happen. So schools, other schools, and Arkansas is one of them, you're going to have to put together a package or figure out some way, and it won't be the school. It will have to be those big businesses that sort of have people working for them that are boosters and support the University of Arkansas, and they get together and go, we got to figure out a way to pay our quarterback more money.
Hey, Walmart, Tyson, JB Hunt.
Yeah, we got to do this. So, I mean, this is an arms race.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how it
goes. It's really legalized.
Sure.
And legal's not the right word, but it's cheating under the old rules, but cheating is now allowed, so it's not cheating anymore.
Yeah, it's interesting. This reminds me a lot. Again, we're going to learn so much about this in its first year, like we did with the transfer portal and how you could play 4 games and still be able to redshirt and transfer, and that basically made it a free agency market.
Right.
And we learned a lot after that first year where kids were like, well, I've played 4 games. Now I ain't going to play for you anymore, and I'm going to transfer out. And it'll be interesting to see where we are a year from now.
And we were talking the other day about this story out of BYU where supposedly some company or whatever is going to step in and give walk-on scholarships
for the baseball team.
For the baseball team, and that if they do it, I promise you, other schools will do it if it works.
Sure.
Because baseball is limited with 11.7 scholarships, but a typical baseball team has about 30, 32 players. So what happens to the rest of them?
Yeah.
Well, you could come in, and Arkansas could simply say, well, okay, we're going to give a full ride to 11 guys, and then that leaves us with 0.7 left over, and then you just sort of say that's what we're going to do, and then all the rest of them could come to Arkansas, and you could tell them in recruiting, you don't have a scholarship, but they come knowing that they're probably going to get one after they get here.
You can't tell them there's a guy who's going to pay for your school once you get here. But again, you set a precedent like BYU was, where if you're getting recruited by BYU, chances are you might get some money when you get there. And
or you might end up with, Dave Van Horn could say, look, I want to take you, but I got no scholarships left. I've offered 11 guys, and I have 11 scholarships. So we don't have any left, but come here and play for us. And he doesn't make any promises, but they know through the grapevine that if they come here, there's already a fund.
Because of a history of what's
that will provide them with the scholarship. So who knows if that's going to happen.
Yeah, it'll be really interesting.
But that's just another one of those things that you mentioned that a year from now, and there are things we don't even know about yet that could happen, you know. So this NIL thing is going off in its own directions.
And you can do it. I mean, technically, you know, Mike, if we had any money and we were in control of the money, we could pay athletes to exclusively talk to us.
Yes.
Now they couldn't, like, you know, obviously it's like team rules and obligations for the team still have to be done. But if we wanted to pay Traylon Burks to talk to us every Tuesday,
we could get exclusive content. In other words, we'd have him one-on-one instead of in a press conference.
Yep. It's wild. Because, you know, there's some Texas A&M, I think it's a message board or some kind of something that did that with a running back and a wide receiver down at A&M.
Yeah, I figured if that happens, it'll happen there first.
That's it.
Well, I tell you about being at media days with the 2 A&M TV guys.
No, gosh.
They stood on the second floor of the hotel and just screamed. They did their reports sending back, and they were just yelling so loud no one else could do anything. And I'm not kidding you, it was like a pep rally. They were talking about Aggies contending to win the SEC title, and it was like done by like a PR thing for the school.
Well, you know, I mean, they probably take after their head coach. He talks a million miles an hour, and he doesn't have sentences, and he just keeps going, and he just talks like this and round and round in a circle, and he doesn't ever stop, and he decides to go this way, and then he goes that way, and I'm bitter still.
They kept using the term contending for the SEC title.
Oh, gosh.
Here's what I'll tell you. I'm going to predict right now that A&M will not contend for the SEC title.
Okay.
Here's what's going to happen.
You heard it here first.
The first time they play Alabama, they're not contending anymore. You know, it's not happening.
All right, Orlando Hog 407. Okay, good. I kind of lost my place here. Wants to know what would be a realistic SEC rank with the defense this year. I heard a lot of talk last year about improvement with Odom at the helm, but it seems at times mediocre to bottom of the pack at best.
Throwing shade on Odom.
Little shade.
Look,
but there were, you know, the Missouri game.
Here's the problem that he had last year. He didn't have any depth. You look at no better example than the Georgia game last year. At halftime, Georgia's offense had scored 3 points with a field goal. I think there was a safety or something, but Arkansas basically, their defense held them to a field goal for the entire first half. I'm thinking, wow. And then the dam broke because they don't have any depth. Guys got tired. They didn't rotate anybody in and off the bench. And that's the whole thing. As the season wore along, then you also added injuries. You added some COVID problems. And then, you know, Grant Morgan gets hurt in the Missouri game in the fourth quarter, late third quarter, whatever, and the defense just collapses.
Jalen Catalan had some crap targeting calls against him.
So they didn't have enough depth last year, but when they were fresh early in games, they were salty. Well, we've seen a lot of evidence so far in camp that there is depth at every position now. And I'm not going to give you a number. I can't sit here and say they're going to rank 5th or 7th or 9th and statistically, but I think they will be upper half of the SEC, 7th or better in defense, most categories by the time the season is over. I think they're going to be a lot better defensively. I have a lot more confidence in the defense right now than I do the offense.
I also like that you just said salty.
Salty.
On ass, Mike. I love it. All right. Austin Hawk fan says, when Malik gets a chance to play, Coach Pittman says we will run a different offense because he isn't as good in the pocket. Is it really a different offense or just some different plays? I love the idea of a change-up against Texas that they really haven't seen.
No, I don't think he's never said anything about a different offense when I've been around. I think he's talking about different plays, and that's logical. And I think this scrimmage that we didn't see on Saturday, I think there's probably some of that going on, because he was out there most of the time. They rested Jefferson. I think they know what they've got in Jefferson. They don't need him out there a lot. They don't want to get him hurt. So this was all about Malik and focusing with him. And I just think, yeah, they had some different plays out there with him, and he probably benefited from that. But I don't think we were talking about a different offense. And as far as Texas, to be honest with you, unless Arkansas were to blow that game open or unless Jefferson were to get hurt, I don't think Malik Hornsby is going to play against Texas. I would be shocked.
Yeah. All right. TL Slayton asks, what's the latest on the team vaccination rate? Alabama claims its rate is almost 100%.
Tried to get some updated numbers, and I think maybe Saturday, and I'm still not successful. The last thing we heard was 88, 89%. I'm pretty sure they're up above that now.
I think it was 93.
Did you hear 93?
Isn't that what Pittman said? He said the thing was around 90%, 93%.
The last one I heard was 88, 89, but if it's up to 93, that's fine. Okay. I did talk to somebody that's familiar with that situation, and I said, can it be like Alabama, 100% or whatever? And he said, here's the problem. And I think you're going to find this is true across the country because I've made some phone calls. These players that are not vaccinated, it's real easy for fans to say, well, what's wrong with them? What's going on here? Are they wusses? What are they afraid of? I think what you're going to find if you looked into this issue was parents. And you can laugh all you want about this, but like if you're a person that is not sure if the vaccine is safe, and this is your kid, and you want that kid to be safe, and you're wary of that, then you might say, no, I'm not giving my permission. Or if they're over 18, you might tell them, look, the parent might have enough that influence over a kid to say, okay, my mom and dad don't want me to do it, so I'm not doing it. And we're not talking about a lot of guys, maybe just 1 or 2 or 3 or whatever, and I don't know how many at Arkansas. But the person I was talking to said that's sort of happening around the country, that we've all been focusing on, well, what's wrong with these athletes that don't want to be vaccinated when most of their teammates have? And he said it's mostly parents.
I can see that. All right. Lanny wants to know, in your opinion, who is the best player on the team this year? The guy that will last the longest in the NFL. No-brainer.
This is a no-brainer. You and I were talking about this earlier. I mean, it's Treylon Burks.
Yep.
I mean, he is, I think you said this to me before we went on, once in every 10-year player. He's that good. I mean, we all know what he's done in the last 2 years, but in camp, just the little that we've seen, there's a piece of video that, and I didn't shoot it, but somebody did, where he goes out one-handed and lays out flat and gets a ball and then just goes rolling and catches it. How does he hang on to the ball like because he's got huge hands.
10 inches, 10 and a half, I think.
And then there's that video that we showed on the air the other day, the little clip that the U of A released, where Jefferson had to throw the ball over Grant Morgan, so he threw high, and here comes here comes Traylon just out of nowhere, going sky high and sticking that hand up, and then once again coming down and laying out, and then somehow holding on to the ball, even though his hand hits the ground like that.
He's incredible to watch.
And so what does he have? He's got size, he's got speed. You can't control him on the line of scrimmage. You don't jam him up. He runs good routes. He hangs on to the football. He's their best player, and if I had to talk about somebody I think could stick around in the NFL for a while, he's it. I think he's a really good receiver, and we may not have seen yet the best of what he can do.
Yeah, he's just scratching the surface. I think a close second could be Jalen Catalon. I think Catalon's maybe mark against him might be size, because he's not super tall, but kid is very talented.
He's just crazy. He just runs over people, and in the NFL, he might end up hurt.
So we'll see. All right. At T. Mary Widow Hog says, the offense bounced back in Saturday's scrimmage, but number of big plays has me worried about the defense. An 80-yard touchdown run, 55-yard touchdown pass by the number 2 quarterback, plus a 40-yard touchdown run by Rocket Sanders. Sounds like some defensive breakdowns.
You know, here's the problem. Anytime that let's say the defense does good, then everybody's worried about the offense. Now, so the offense supposedly bounces back. Now everybody's worried about the defense. The point is, we didn't see any of this, and there's things we don't know. Sam Pittman didn't get specific about Hornsby. You know, did he break that 80-yard run against the ones? Did he break it against the twos? What about the 45-yard touchdown pass? We don't know the circumstances. I'm going to take a guess, because I think that scrimmage was all about developing depth, as I said before. So I'm going to take a guess and say that 80-yard run was not against the one defense. Probably twos versus twos. And if it was against the ones, then good for him. But I wouldn't get all bent out of shape about the defense because of those numbers, because I don't think it was probably against those guys. So what does that mean? It also means you probably just shouldn't get real excited about the offensive numbers, because it probably didn't come against the one defense. We know that Jefferson didn't play much in that scrimmage. Well, what does that tell you? It probably means the ones weren't out there a lot, unless they put Hornsby with the number 1, and that could have happened.
Yeah. We also know Traylon Smith and Traylon Burks and A.J. Green didn't even practice.
Part of the issue here is we're dealing with the lack of information. We just don't know for sure.
Yeah.
And so I wouldn't get too concerned about any of this stuff. And again, inter-squad scrimmages are frustrating for fans and us in the media, because every time one unit looks good, the other side of the ball doesn't look good, and it's like a yo-yo. You're just going, oh, what's going on now? So.
Yeah. All right, final question. Here we go. Razorback Redneck wants to know, who is the ex-Razorback you've had the most fun hanging out with?
Okay, it's probably a guy that a lot of the younger fans have no idea who I'm talking about. It's a guy named George Beckett. George Beckett died, I think, about 10 years ago, around 2011. Great guy. He played on the 54 Southwest Conference team. They were called the Little Pigs, the 25 Little Pigs, mainly because Bowden Wyatt and his staff were so mean they ran off all these other guys, and there were only 25 of them left when the season started. And they somehow won the Southwest Conference. Now, I've seen video of the game that really won it for them. It was at Texas. And there was a guy named Henry Moore who was, I think, a fullback on that team. He broke off an 80-yard run, and that allowed Arkansas to win that game. The remarkable thing about that film that I saw was there were Razorback fans that poured onto the field when the game was over, and it wasn't like the Tennessee game here in '99. It wasn't like that. The whole field wasn't full. But this was in Austin, and I would say half of their football field was covered up with Razor. It looked like 4,000, 5,000, 6,000 fans out there going crazy. And it was a big win. Well, George Beckett was on that team. He was the father of 2 Razorbacks, Chris Beckett and Jay Beckett, and then Jake Beckett who is Jay Beckett's son, played for Arkansas. So that's a great Razorback family. But here's the thing about George Beckett. He was a big fan, obviously, afterward, and he would go to he lived, I think, in Missouri, maybe. He wasn't at a lot of the local, like the home games here, regular season, but where he would show up is at bowl games, like the Cotton Bowl. If there was a Cotton Bowl workout, And we'd be stuck outside because we couldn't go in and watch, so we're waiting for it to be over. And fans would show up too. George would always be there, and he'd be in there talking, and he'd tell you funny stories. Or what he was really good at is NCAA basketball. There's always a media hotel when you cover the basketball team at NCAA basketball tournament, and there's a media hospitality room that theoretically is just for media. He would be in there, and we all wanted him in there because he was hilarious. He'd tell all these stories. I remember a couple of things. One time, he was talking about, I made some comment about, the better teams, the players have to they have to bond, they have to like each other. If players don't like each other, teams can't win that way. And he just started laughing at me, and he said, let me tell you something. And he told me about a guy, I'm not going to name him, but it was on that 54 team. He said, I couldn't stand him. When we got off the football field, I went one way and he went another way. I didn't want anything to do with him. He was a weirdo. But he said, on the field, we were buddies. We were pals. We didn't have to be friends off the field. We wanted to win, and I knew he wanted to win as much as I did. And so this idea that you're all buddies and you all hang out together, that's nice, but it's not necessarily, according to him, it wasn't necessary all the time. Now, it could be, but this team won the Southwest Conference against incredible odds, and they weren't just a bunch of buddies hanging around with each other. There were some groups that liked each other and some that didn't. I would call him a myth buster too, because when you made statements, he would always be the kind of guy that scoff at what you said. I was asking him about this was at a basketball media hospitality room, and I was asking him about Bowden Wyatt because I was curious about him. And I said, man, I've heard he was so mean. A guy told me the other day that his assistant coaches had razor straps in their back pocket. And if you were on the team and you hit the ground in a practice and didn't immediately bounce back up, they'd take those razor straps and start whacking you until you got back up. And he got mad. He looked at me and he said, that is a stupid fan myth. He said, first of all, he said, Billy Ray Smith Sr. was on that team. Now, for people that don't know, Billy Ray Smith Sr., Billy Ray Smith Jr.'s dad, and they were both really good Razorbacks. But Senior was also a Golden Gloves boxer and apparently one rough customer. And he said, Billy Ray Smith Sr. was on that team. He said, I'd like to see the assistant coach that would hit him with a razor strap. He said he would be eating that razor strap in about 5 seconds. And I mean, he would just tell stories like this. And then Chris Beckett, which is his younger son, I'd see him all the time, and then I'd go up to him and I'd go, hey, you're not going to believe what your dad told me the other day. And I'd tell him some story that George, and he would just be laughing. He said, that's my dad. He said, imagine growing up with him as your dad, because he's telling all these stories. He was a great storyteller, and to this day, I really miss him.
Yeah, that's cool. You know what makes me sad? No Ced 76 today.
Where'd he go?
What happened, Ced? Come back. Ask questions. We miss you.
Might have made him mad. I might have said something in an answer that made him
well,
mad.
we apologize. I apologize on behalf of Mike. Ced 76. Come back. Ask more questions. If you have a question for Ask Mike, remember to head on over to our website. You can ask there. You can ask on Twitter, and you can ask on Facebook. Just get us your questions so we can talk about them and give you some answers. All right, that's going to do it for this week's Ask Mike. We'll see you next week.